Welcome to On Call with Dr. Anselm Anyoha. In this podcast, learn about the social, emotional, and physical health of children and their journey from birth through preschool and beyond. Find compassionate answers to issues parents and children face and that pediatricians encounter every day. Discussions in this podcast are not meant to diagnose or treat any conditions. Parents and caregivers talk with your children's pediatricians or doctors about topics and perspectives presented here. You are on call with Dr. Anselm Anyoha. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. In the last episode, we spoke about how newborns and babies spit up frequently. Today, Dr. Anyoha will talk about another problem parents face when newborns are constipated. Dr. Anyoha, let's start with what are some of the reasons newborns get constipated and what parents can do when this happens?
Thank you, Paula, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Constipation is a very frequent question parents call me for, especially parents with newborns. They're always calling for what's going on with the baby's bowel movement. The baby hasn't moved bowel for a day, for 2 days, for 3 days. And they're worried, they're frustrated, and they think the baby is in pain. The first thing I try to do is to determine whether the baby is actually constipated or whether the baby is just having decreased bowel movement. Because there's a difference between a baby who's constipated and a baby who's having decreased bowel movement. And parents usually confuse those two things.
What are some of the things parents look for, and how do you advise them?
So for a baby who's constipated is a baby who has probably not used bowel movement for 2 days or 3 days. And when they do, they have pebbles when a baby passes hard, dry stools. So that's what we call constipation. A baby who has not moved bowel for 3 days and eventually does, and the stool is pasty, soft, or watery, is not constipated. So the difference is not in the time in between bowel movement, is the consistency of the bowel movement that determines constipation.
Does this happen when parents bring a newborn home from the hospital? When does this happen most often?
Well, I see this very early in my practice. Babies as young as 1 week old or 10 days old, or within 2 weeks, mother is already complaining that the baby is constipated. Sometimes it turns out that this is because the baby has not had bowel movement for a couple of days, and they're struggling and they're straining, and the mother thinks because they're straining, they're constipated. The idea is to ask the parents questions and see whether this is actually a constipation or just a decreased bowel movement. Now, I think being discharged from the hospital and coming home, there's a transition, because when babies are in the hospital, they drink the ready-made milk formula. All they have to do is unscrew the cap, put a nipple, and feed the baby. So everything is going well. And now they're home, and they probably don't have the hospital formula that the baby was taking. So they go to the stores and buy powdered formula, and then they mix it and then feed the baby. So that transition from ready-made formula to our formula where you have to be mixing with water contributes to constipation. My baby is constipated. Is it because I've changed from ready-made formula that was provided in the hospital to this powdered milk formula that I'm using now?
Let's say that happens. They have the formula and they think this is the reason the baby is constipated. Now what?
Find out if the mother is mixing the formula well, because there's a proportion, 1 scoop of powdered milk to 2 ounces of water. So that's my first question, to just make sure I've had to educate parents about the need to stick to the recommendation by the manufacturers. Because if you don't put enough water as recommended, the formula is going to be thick and it's going to have problem passing through the gut, and the baby is going to be constipated. The second thing I determine is whether I want to see the baby in my office or whether I want to advise the mother over the phone. Those are 2 critical things I'm looking for. Is this a baby that has to come into my office to be examined, or is this the baby that I have to counsel the mother over the phone? A frequent misconception parents bring to my attention is that the iron in the formula causes constipation. They want to change to formula without iron, but that's not a good idea. Your baby needs iron, and the iron in the formula is too small to cause any constipation. Iron in the formula does not cause constipation. I just want to make sure the parents know that.
So what are some of the causes? The baby's not eating solid food yet. How do you advise parents?
Sometimes individual babies have poor motility in their gut. The gut is not very active. It's an individual thing. They don't have the brisk bowel movement that other babies have. So they're prone to constipation. And some babies don't make effort to poop. For some reason, they're not interested. So some babies are constipated and others are not. Babies who are breastfed hardly get constipation. Breast milk is easily digested. So it's actually hard to pinpoint exactly what is causing constipation in a particular baby. A 1-week-old baby or 10 days old baby, we're looking for is whether this is true constipation and how to treat the baby to help bowel movement. And from experience, I've come to realize that some of the babies who are constipated have hard stool in the rectum already. They have hard stool, which is preventing soft stool from coming down. So until you dislodge and bring down that hard stool, the rest of the stool is not coming. It's not going to come down.
That definitely sounds like something a pediatrician should be doing and not a parent.
When I have a case of true constipation, I have to invite the parents to bring the baby to my office for intervention to help the baby evacuate her bowels and move her bowels that particular period of time. Because if you don't, it keep piling up and the baby become more in distress. For those kind of babies, parents have to bring them to my office. For the baby that is just having decreased bowel movement and not constipation. For those parents who tell me that their baby hasn't pooped for a couple of days or 3 days, and the last time they pooped, it was soft. What I advise them to do is, number one, to give the baby a warm bath. Giving the baby a warm bath sometimes helps the bowel movement to occur. That's one thing the parents can do. Another thing the parent can do is to flex the knee and the hip over the abdomen and simulate a bicycle ride. What that does is it relaxes the pelvic muscle and also stimulates the abdomen. Those might work. And sometimes, if I feel strongly, I can tell them to try 100% prune juice or apple juice or pear. That's going to be a little amount, 1 teaspoon, added into the formula. Usually that does the magic, and the baby goes and everybody's happy.
Especially the baby.
And the mother too, everybody's happy.
What are regular bowel movement habits? You talked about what parents can do at home.
Yes.
What should parents expect from a newborn?
A newborn baby can have a lot of bowel movements the first few days of birth. In fact, it's not unusual for babies to poop each time they eat. So if they drank milk, ate every 3 hours, they can poop almost 8 times a day. Each time they eat, they poop, and the poop is usually soft water stool. But that changes quickly when a baby is about 5 days, 7 days. The number of times the baby's poop will decrease. Instead of having bowel movement every 3-4 hours, they can have 1 or 2 times a day. And then some babies, when they become 2 weeks old, they might have 1 bowel movement a day or even every other day. And so that change in bowel movement habits is what starts all this constipation fear in the mind of the parent. So they expect the baby to be having bowel movement just like a newborn. Now it decreases. And in fact, some breastfed babies, their bowel movement has a lot of variation. Sometimes once a day, sometimes 3 times a day, sometimes once a week.
Are there any medical conditions that parents need to know about that could cause a newborn to have constipation.
Yes, particularly there's a disease called Hirschsprung. Hirschsprung disease is a condition where a baby is born without the proper innervation, or the innervation is very minimal, and there's no motility, there's no movement to propel the stool down to the bottom. So some babies are born with that condition. In fact, 1 in every 5,000 babies have that condition where there's poor innervation of the colon and the rectum, and it causes constipation because the stool is not able to propel down to the bottom. Parents should be aware of that too, especially if their babies having unrelenting constipation that is not stopping. Usually, the first sign that your baby might have Hirschsprung, this disease, is if there is a delay in the first stool baby's pass after birth. The first stool baby's pass after birth is called meconium. It's a green stool. Every baby passes that after birth. Kids who have Hirschsprungs, it takes them longer period of time, like after 24 hours, to pass that first stool. So that is actually a good indication. But the bottom line is for every parent whose babies have unrelenting, persistent constipation has to check it out and consult with their pediatricians. My philosophy is once a parent is concerned, to call a pediatrician right away and have that discussion. Because if the baby has any condition, then it's different than the other babies. So have that conversation if the mom has some worries about whether the baby is having a bowel movement or not. This podcast is to create awareness of what is normal and what is not normal. Most of the things that cause constipation in newborns resolve with minor intervention. So that's the good news. The bad news is that it worries the parents so much because they think the baby is in pain. And then parents, they can't sleep if the baby is uncomfortable until the baby poops and parents are happy.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. To answer questions you may have in a future podcast, write to Dr. Anyoha on his website at moderneraPediatrics.com. Listen to On Call with Dr. Anyoha wherever you find your podcasts.